All right, everyone. Welcome to Lecture 5 in the series. So this one's entitled, How Being Helpful Can Get You Sued. Okay, so it's a little provocative, I understand, but it is entirely true. So, I work with a lot of top lawyers in various jurisdictions around the world, and they tell me the same thing. When entrepreneurs and business people generally get themselves into serious legal trouble, it's not because they're being reckless or they were greedy or they were dishonest, right? Usually they were competent, they were trusted, and they were just trying to help. So let's remember the John McAfee quote from the previous lecture. Again, if you haven't watched the previous lectures, please go back and do it. The knowledge builds on itself. Anyway, the John McAfee quote, any idiot can make money, but keeping money, there are very few who can do that. All right, so in this one, hopefully you'll come to appreciate why he says that in a really practical way. So we're going to get into some good stuff in this lecture. We're going to understand some real practical business issues that trip business people up, typically in real life. So when things go wrong, when money's lost, when a business fails, the law generally doesn't care that you meant well. It doesn't give a shit about that. The law will ask its own questions. It typically cares about things like who actually made decisions or who relied on those decisions, who had the ability to stop things from going wrong. They're the kind of issues that the law cares about, not whether you meant well. All right, so that's what this lecture is about. It's not about being unhelpful. Being helpful is great, obviously. I'm being helpful right now by passing on this knowledge and distributing all this educational content about business and the law, right? This isn't about not being helpful. It's about when helpful behavior can turn into control and legal responsibility, even when you don't realize that's what happened. All right, so we're going to set up a real-world scenario, a fictional real-world example to illustrate the point and to help you understand the legal principles involved. All right, so what do we do first? From the last lecture, always, we set up the facts and circumstances. That is essential. I've got a new pen today. It feels good to write with. All right, so facts and circumstances. Legal questions are meaningless. Legal analysis is meaningless without facts and circumstances. So in our scenario, we're going to set up the facts and circumstances. So we're going to have a founder. She established a skincare company and brand a decade ago. Okay, it's been super successful and she's formally stepped back recently from her role. Her name's Karen. Karen set up a super successful skincare brand and company. It's been running for 10 years. She's been grinding and she's built this thing and it's successful. Now there's a restructuring, or recently there was a restructuring, and she's no longer an executive, right? She formally resigns as a director. She steps back as a general manager. She appoints a new general manager. There's a new management chain. There's new people in roles. She's formally stepped away. She tells her team, hey guys, I'm stepping back. I'm gone. That's it. I'm finished. Right? She's completely gone. She's going to go pursue her hobbies. She's going to go paragliding in the Bahamas and spend her days enjoying herself, right? But in practice, on the facts and circumstances, people are still emailing her all the time, asking her what to do. She's still approving major decisions in those emails. Those decisions are feeding through and they're getting done. They're being executed, even though there's a new management chain. She turns up occasionally when there's some issue, some fire, not a literal fire, a metaphorical fire. She'll turn up one day at a random point. Someone's emailed her and told her about a big issue, and she's acting out of habit, and she turns up, and on that day she puts out that metaphorical fire in new product development or whatever, right? There's no bad intent. Karen's not operating out of ego necessarily. She's operating just out of habit. Okay, now we're going to introduce an external stress event to our facts and circumstances, right? So this is where we will understand how Karen is going to get herself into shit without realizing it and is going to get herself sued, right? So we introduce an external stress event. So what happens? Let's call it a safety complaint or a series of safety complaints about a new product. Or actually, let's make it a series of safety complaints, really bad safety complaints about some serious rash that everyone's getting from a product that is fairly new, right? And Karen's been notified of this via email when she's in the Bahamas paragliding, and she jumps in on her emails and hops into Slack, and she starts telling people to keep selling and we'll handle returns, don't do a recall, change the wording on this document, send this template response, things like that. Okay, so this is how it becomes personal to her. If injuries occur or a regulator gets involved as a result of this faulty product, the rash is really bad, and then a regulator and the authorities get involved, then the law starts to ask questions like, who decided to keep distributing after knowledge of risk, for example? That's the kind of idea that the law is concerned about. Who decided to keep distributing after knowledge of risk, for example? And this is where the potential personal exposure arises for Karen in this scenario. So she might be considered a directing mind at a critical time on the facts and circumstances. So the law will ask who was actually deciding. And in this scenario, on the facts and circumstances, it was Karen, the founder. That's how personal liability can sneak back in. She might not have signed anything. She might not have any official role, but none of that saves her in this scenario. Now, as I said, this usually only comes up when there's an external stress event. Well, why? Okay, so this is crucial to understand. When business is going well, it's growing, everyone's aligned, the money's flowing, the cash is moving, Karen's just acting, mostly out of habit in our scenario. But technically at law, she's become responsible and liable, and she doesn't even know or realize. Okay, but when there's the stress event, when there's the damage or the loss, someone's harmed by this super bad rash that the product's giving everyone, someone wants to recover money because of their hospital bills, that's when the lawyers come in, the glorious lawyers. And that's when Karen's going to realize the exposure was there all along from her daily actions and habits, right? So common phrases that you'll often hear business people and entrepreneurs casually say in the day-to-day is, let me take a look, or I'll handle it, or no worries, I've got it covered. You yourself probably use these phrases every day. I know that I use them, right? But they do potentially have the ability to get you into shit, depending on the facts and circumstances. Remember, guys, critical point. The law doesn't care about titles. It doesn't care that Karen had no official title anymore, right? It doesn't care that Karen wasn't being paid in this scenario. It does not give a shit about those things, right? Karen probably thought she was staying informal, but that doesn't really mean anything at law on these facts and circumstances. So, from this example, Karen stepped back from a formal role, but she stayed involved on the facts and circumstances. So, yes, success is about helping out. It's about helping people get what they want. If you help enough people get what they want, you will get what you want. I understand that. But remember, in business law, control attracts responsibility from the previous lectures, right? It always comes back to O, C, B, ownership, control, benefit, right? Actually, all of these, right? All of these attract responsibility potentially. But in our scenario, in our example, really what we're talking about here is control. So today we're going to focus on control because that's where Karen tripped up, and it's where most people are practically most likely to trip up. It's definitely where Karen screwed up, right? All right, so the law can and will assume that she had control even when she didn't formally, right? She wasn't formally at the company anymore. She wasn't in any formal director role or any formal management role. She was completely stepped away in the formalities, but on the facts and circumstances, even when she didn't, right? Even when she wasn't formally there, on the facts and circumstances, she was still exercising some control. That's the point. So you'll hear people, business people say dumb things like, oh, I didn't have a title, or I wasn't paid, or I was just giving friendly advice. I was just there temporarily. I was just helping out a friend, etc., etc. Okay, yes, you're a good person for doing that, but legally, this can be dangerous. Why can it be dangerous? Well, because the law doesn't ask or doesn't concern itself with, were you being nice, right? It's not going to ask that question. The law asks two primary questions. Did others rely on you? And was it reasonable for them to rely on you? All right, so we're going to map this out. Now remember, this is a legal pattern. It's across systems. It's not specific to any legal jurisdiction or any country or any specific system. It's really in every mature legal system in some form, in principle. It'll just have different labels. Remember, the basic principles here are always the same. It doesn't matter if you're in Canada or Chile or Crimea, wherever, right? It's going to have different names like duty of care or whatever, depending on the jurisdiction. You don't need to worry about that. The principle is always the same. We're dealing with the legal principle. The legal idea is always the same. So, what is that legal idea, right? It is one legal idea in three parts. 1, reliance. 2, breach. And 3, damage. 3 parts, 1 basic legal idea, and 3 parts that exists across all legal jurisdictions in some form. All right, so we're going to look at each of the 3 parts of this one legal idea. We're going to dive into them so you understand. All right, the first is reliance. So, did someone rely on you? When did they rely on you? Did you know or should you have known that they were relying on you? Was it reasonable for them to rely on you? So these are the sort of ideas the law cares about, not were you being helpful or were you being nice. It doesn't really care about those. These sort of ideas it cares about, right? They're generally the questions that we'll be looking at. So remember, these are broad principles, guys. This is for business people in any jurisdiction, in any country. We're keeping it very broad, right? So if the answer was yes to any of the previous questions, then you will be held responsible. So in our example with Karen, there was no written contract anymore, right? There was no payment. There was no formal role, But the law doesn't care, right? In our example, the law cares about it cares about her behavior on the facts and circumstances. It cares how she acted. So, and how she acts determines everything on the facts and circumstances. And then the law will just go ahead and assume responsibility. All right, to be clear, if you step into the decision-making space, the law will follow you there. All right, so then we'll move on to principle 2 in our single legal idea, breach. All right, so hopefully at this point in the lecture and in the lecture series really, you can see that the law will just assign responsibility or an obligation based on facts and circumstances, seemingly out of nowhere. and possibly without anyone, or certainly without you even realizing that that's what happened. All right, so once it's done that, once you have practically in the day-to-day, like once Karen, for example, every day is taking on control, even though she's formally stepped away, she's taking on control on the facts and circumstances, then the law is assuming responsibility. And then the standard that the law is going to hold her to will change. So here, this is what breach means. It means failing to meet the standard of behavior the law expects of you. Right? So now, by assuming practical control day to day on the facts and circumstances, the law is going to hold you responsible, and it's going to hold you to a higher standard now, right? And then the breach is when you fail to meet that standard according to the law. So if you remember for Karen, this is all happening in the background from her repeated daily actions after she formally steps away. So without her even realizing it, she's assuming control and responsibility and therefore potential liability. So she thinks she's just helping out, right? And that's when she gets sued, basically. And then it's only after that that she realizes that actually she was in control and she was responsible. So the law's an ass like that, really. I understand that it seems like an unfair concept maybe, but that's how it works. Remember, every legal system will express this idea differently, right? But the pattern is the same. When people rely on you and you influence the outcomes, the law will consider you responsible. So, if you're responsible without even realizing it, like Karen, the next question the law will ask is, did you act as a reasonable person would, right? This is an important thing to remember, guys. At this stage, caveat, quick understanding. Sometimes inaction can be a breach as well. So delaying, not speaking up, not intervening when you should, because you're being held to this new standard. That new standard can sometimes mean that if your inaction is also a problem, can also cause a breach, right? So these can all be breaches, these inactions. If the law says that you are responsible according to the facts and circumstances, then you had responsibility. Okay, so in these last two lectures in particular, you'll notice that we've been really practically focused, and we've done that deliberately. So our goal is simple. It's practical legal education for business people so you can keep more of your money, right? It's very simple. So we're focusing on practical stuff early on. So hopefully you can see, especially from these last two lectures, this one and the previous one, the law is like a tool. It's like a tool set. You can think of the law like a hammer. So you can use the law to build amazing things and put amazing things into the world and have great success. But it can also be used against you. Like a hammer, it can be used to do serious, serious damage. All right, so that moves us to the final principle, which is damages. Okay, so this is the final one. So damages or damage, the law is typically looking in principle for all three. So it's looking for reliance and breach and then damage, right? So damage here just means real harm, right? So in our example for Karen, it's people really getting hurt by their shitty skincare product. So the law will hold Karen responsible if she was best placed to prevent this harm when others were relying on her. She didn't need a title, right? She didn't need to be listed on any formal documents anymore to attract the responsibility that came from her assuming control. You don't need to be listed as a director or as a trustee or as a partner or whatever, right? If you act like one of these things repeatedly, the law will treat you like one. The law has fun concepts like shadow director, or de facto director, or assumed responsibility, right? Remember, the law is just made up of people. They are not stupid people. You're not tricking anyone with word games. If you're not listed as a director, for example, but you act like one, the law is not fooled. If you assume a role in practice, you'll be treated as that role, with all the responsibility and all the liability and all the assumed control that comes with it, right? The law does not intervene early. The law intervenes when there is an external stress event, when something breaks. All right, to be clear, this lecture is not telling you to not help, right? That is not the point. Honestly, it's probably the safest way, to be perfectly frank, but it's not really practical. It's not the point of the lecture, right? We're educating you on the reality of the business law. You need to be aware that there is a point when help becomes responsibility. It's probably helpful to think of it more like a continuum, right? In Karen's case. At one end, Karen here is on holidays in the Bahamas, paragliding, enjoying herself, ignoring everything, forgetting she even started a skincare company 10 years ago, right? On the other end, she's on there in Slack every day, unable to detach, right? At this side, opposite extreme, answering Slack messages, sending emails, finding out what's going on, issuing commands. That's the other end. At that end, and there's everywhere in between. And in between those two extremes, she's gradually accumulating responsibility and liability without even realizing it. Just because you started helping informally does not matter. That's the point. The safer behavior always is to make it clear who decides, document when you're advising, and step back on the facts and circumstances, right? In actuality, once the new roles are defined. So, what's the core takeaway from this lecture? Simply, the law doesn't punish help. It punishes responsibility and control you didn't realize that you took on. If you don't want the obligation, don't take the control on the facts and circumstances. Across legal systems, responsibility follows reliance and control, right? Not intentions or job titles.